Music has always been such a big part of my identity. I associate every memory with a band or a song. And the songs by The Cure, Lullaby, and The Smiths' How Soon Is Now bring me back to a very specific time in my life, and that is the summer of 1996. I believe it was March or April that year. I was in high school. I was 16 years old. It was in the 10th grade. My friends and I had gotten word of a new goth club that opened up in Stony Brook called Subversion. Now, Stony Brook was just 10 minutes up the road, and it was the first club that had opened up so close to where we had lived. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved going clubbing in the city. However, it wasn't necessary because in the 90s on Long Island, we had our fair share of goth clubs that were just as good. We had Strychnine, Nostradamus, which later became KGB. There was Industry, there was Detour. And then, of course, before that, you had Mesh, you had Smashlight, you had Clockwork. So we had our fair share, and we really didn't need to go into the city if we didn't want to. When a club would open up on Long Island, our ears would perk up because we were young. We all had curfews. So the closer the club was to us, the longer we can actually stay there. So we decided that we were going to rally the troops at my house that Saturday because my friend Dawn was going to be the one driving and she lived across the street. So everyone's at my house. We're getting ready and my bed is a mountain of clothes and CDs that everybody had brought over because we used to pregame. And when I say pregame, we didn't pregame like people do by today's standards, like getting all liquored up. We would pregame by really getting amped for the music. And we had, a conglomerate of everybody's CDs on my bed. We had Sisters of Mercy, Lords of the New Church. We had even Industrial Light, Frontline, Leather Strip, Skinny Puppy. So we were getting good and amped up, and we started getting ready at about 3 o'clock, and doors were at 7. So naturally, we were getting ready very, very slowly. So 7 o'clock rolls around. My friend Dawn shows up, and she was like, all right, let's go. So we get in the car, and that's when the jitters actually hit us. And it sounds so cheesy. It is a term that my friend Elena had coined, and she would either call it club anticipation or club anxiety. I think it was club anticipation. And I have no idea why it would happen, but it would hit every now and again when we would go to a new club where we would get ourselves so excited and amped up about it that we were just bursting at the seams and we would be a shaking mass by the time we were halfway there. So we show up and Elena is experiencing the jitters, probably the worst out of all of us. Dawn I don't think anything ever affected that girl. And I have mild to moderate anxiety, but I'm super excited at the same time. So we head to the door and we go to pay the cover charge. And as I'm getting closer to the door, I'm hearing the song that's playing. It's the Wake Sideshow. This is one of my all-time favorite songs. At this point, anxiety gone, sprinter's legs activated, and I could not pay that cover charge fast enough and bolt up those stairs, but not too fast, because I had a group of people that I was with, and there was no way in hell that I was walking into that room alone. Not going to happen. So we enter the room, and the club is packed. Most of Nassau and Suffolk County are in attendance, as well as a mass of unfamiliar faces. One of those unfamiliar faces I noticed almost right away, and it was funny because we kind of almost simultaneously noticed each other, and he was intriguing. He was definitely in some way involved with the club because he was very purposefully running from DJ booth to out of sight, making it a point to speak to a lot of the guests. And he had a very post-punk look to him. He had chin-length wavy hair, shaved underneath, kind of pushed to one side, black cords wrapped around the wrist and around the neck. He had 20-hole Doc Martens, and his overall look seemed very post-punk to me. He had this killer smile, too. He was a social butterfly, and what really made him stand out to me was the fact that he exuded such confidence. His idiosyncrasies, when he spoke, he did it with such purpose. When he listened so intently, he was completely fixed on what the other person was saying. Confidence and intelligence are two very attractive qualities to me, and he was giving me every indication that he was a very intelligent person. I mean, to me, he could have been just, a complete moron and talking about Beavis and Butthead. However, from my vantage point, that wasn't the case. He really made the rounds, and he spoke to every single person in that room. Everyone but me. But despite the fact that he hadn't actually spoken to me, that didn't mean that we weren't completely staring at each other the whole freaking night. I'm not going to lie. Although I played it completely cool and composed on the outside, every time I caught him looking at me, I was like, damn right. At one point during the night, his friend had actually made it over to me, and his name was Nick. Nick was from Australia, and through our conversation, I found out that the mystery guy's name was Davy. He and Davy actually went to high school together, and they were really good friends, and they ran the club, Davy. So, like a typical 16-year-old goth girl with a crush, I went home and listened to the most melancholy music. I wrote the cheesiest poetry you could possibly imagine. I drew his face incessantly, the kind of behavior that one would partake in that would make someone a little bit scared. However, I'm a product of the 80s. I'm a product of movies like Pretty in Pink, Some Kind of Wonderful, Modern Girls, that longing, heart-pounding intensity that was just very much a part of my personality. I was smitten. So naturally, I was going to be there that Saturday. That was without a doubt. And my friends, they were completely on board because we had a blast. The music was great. The turnout was fantastic. So we made plans to go that Saturday. This time, I shopped for the occasion. I went to a very normal girl store called Rainbow Shops, but they were really good because, number one, they were cheap, and their staples were fantastic so long as they came in black. And every now and again, you would find that sort of holy grail gem of an item, and that Saturday, I actually did. I found a floor-length black lace tank top dress, square neckline, and the underskirt wasn't fully attached, so I could actually trim it, which I did. So I trimmed the underskirt portion of it to just above the knee, therefore you can actually see my 20-hole docks through the lace, and teamed up with my studded collar, with my rosary beads, and I had this armband that was metal and swirly that I always wore on my right arm. That night, Davy approached me. And we talked a lot about music, and he asked me about my favorite bands, my favorite songs, and by the time his DJ set had come up, he played every single one of my favorite songs. True to form, Davy was a social butterfly, and more he would actually find his way back to me. And as time progressed, eventually, 90% of his free time at the club was wherever I was. So one night we actually exchanged phone numbers and we talked a few nights a week. I was so over the top. I had to set the ambiance for a phone call. I had candles burning. I had incense lit. I had to make sure that I had a backing track. So I would put on a CD that was melodic, but nothing too aggressive, like Faith in the Muse or something of the like. And I remember laying on my bed, talking on the phone, kind of twirling the phone cord in my hand. Yes, phone cord, because we didn't have a cordless phone in the house yet. It was 1996. And I remember where my phone was sat on my dresser right by my bed, I had to make sure that I didn't move too far away because the cord wasn't that long. Because if I turned just a little bit too much, then I would pull the phone cord out of the wall. You know how you can tell by the way a person is speaking that they're smiling through their words? Well, I was praying that he couldn't tell that I was actually doing that because I could damn well hear that he was. I mean, it was like a game of chess, this back and forth. It was tempestuous and just nonchalantly trying to impress one another when it was obvious to everybody else around that we were clearly infatuated with one another. Just playing it coy. I don't know if we were just trying to draw out the process because it was just so much fun, or if we were just genuinely trying to not get hurt. I was 16, he was 18 going on 19, and we were at that elite goth phase where we didn't get it yet, so we were just desperately trying to establish ourselves in the pack and just seem cool. Everything was dramatic, everything was exaggerated, and if the 2016 version of myself would have actually seen the 1996 version of myself, I would have been laughing my ass off. This dramatic hands stapled to forehead behavior seemed expected, so it just became very ingrained. Luckily, later on, we learned much better than to act like morons. The following Saturday, I was on the dance floor. I was dancing with my friends, and I feel a hand on my shoulder. I turn around, and it's Davy. Without a word, he takes me by the hand, and he leads me toward the back of the club. And as we go toward the back of the club, there's this big black curtain that is up, and he pulls it aside, and I realize that there's actually a little bit more space back there, and there's also a door off to the side. He lets go of my hand, and he opens the door, steps inside, flips on the light, and I realize it's a small office. And he takes me by the hands, and he pulls me inside, closes the door behind me, and he says, "I think you know what I want to ask you." And I said, "I think so." And he said, "I would like for us to be official." To which I said, "Yeah, okay." Without another word, he had a hand on either side of my face, and he kissed me in the most dramatic and choreographed fashion. However, that completely should not detract from the fact that it was pretty epic. I went home and I relived that kiss about 275 times until I finally fell asleep, and when I woke up, I relived it a little bit more. Probably for the rest of the week until the next Saturday came. I wasn't old enough to have a driver's license. Davy didn't have a car, and we both had school, work, and other commitments, so the only time we really saw each other was Saturday nights, and we really looked forward to that. And I just remember I would be standing there, and suddenly he'd come up behind me and wrap his arms around my shoulder, or he had this fixation with kissing my wrist. I had to actually stop putting perfume there because I didn't want to kill the guy. Then came the summer, and we got to see each other more. There were parties, there were bonfires, there were get-togethers, there were other clubs that we had gone to, but mostly we drove. Out of all of us, my friend Dawn was the only one with a car, and her car was huge. It may as well have been a boat. And we would go to Port Jeff, and we would pick up Davy and Nick and all the usual suspects, and we'd probably end up with like 2 to 3 carloads of people and just drive. We'd be driving around listening to mixtapes, and we would be going to Mary's Grave, Sweet Hollow Road, head of the harbor, and then we'd probably end up at some random diner where everybody would have to put the tables together because there were so many of us, where back in 1996, you can actually smoke. They ask you once you go to a diner, smoking or non-smoking, and I was sort of a social smoker at the time. Most of our friends smoked, and we would just drink tons of coffee, eat mountains of French fries, and just sit and talk. But again, mostly we drove, and just for the sake of just driving around, we would just be listening to the music. Davy and I sat in the back seat, my head in his chest, and The Cure would be playing a lot, actually, and that's when Love Song by The Cure became our song. I can still remember all those mixtapes. There was Sisters of Mercy, Lords of the New Church, there was Depeche Mode, New Order, The Smiths, Morrissey, so a lot of 80s music. I didn't have a cell phone, and they weren't exactly common in 96, so I don't think I'd even actually seen one other than on TV, and they were like the size of a brick. But I did have a little green plastic transparent bane of my existence called a pager. Like clockwork, when I was out with my friends, this pager would go off, and we would have to find a payphone within the next 10 minutes, because if I didn't call my mother back within the next 10 minutes, I would return home to screaming hell and undoubtedly be grounded. From the moment that Davy and I met, I was in a cloud, you know. I felt like I was in a daydream, and as much as I tried to push it out of my head, I knew that our time was coming to a close, because at the end of the summer, Davy was going off to university, and neither of us drove, and he was going way upstate. I mean, may as well have been Canada, and I knew that this was the kiss of death to my perfect 80s movie. So The Cure Love Song, like I said, became our song, but the way The Smiths' How Soon Is Now plays into it is because it was on one of the mixtapes. And there's a line in that song that it says, "There's a club if you'd like to go, you could meet somebody who really loves you." And during that part, my friends would turn to Davy and I as we're being all gushy, and they would obnoxiously scream that line at us. I really think we made them sick. The summer came to an end, and Nick went back to Australia, and Davy went away. We kept in touch, but it wasn't the same. In New York, in his mind, he was this big fish in a little pond, and when he went away to university, it was the exact opposite for him, and he was desperately trying to find his way. He was trying to make friends, and then eventually just living the university life, having that experience, where back home, here I am, I have a few years left of high school, and we were leading entirely different lives, and we just grew apart. Now, before Davy had left, he actually passed the torch to Subversion to my friend, who was in our group and went to high school with us, and he was a senior just like Davy. And it got to the point where we basically all helped, and we ran Subversion. That first night back at Subversion, that first Saturday, where it was just us, that was rough. Being in that space with all the familiar smells, the sounds, the faces, there was this huge, just Davy-shaped hole. And as much as I did my tough guy thing, I tried to act unscathed, I wasn't okay. So back to that song, How Soon Is Now by the Smiths. The line in that song that my friends would obnoxiously shout at Davy and I when we were being all gushy or whenever it came on the mixtape, the verse that went along with that line was, "There's a club if you'd like to go, you could meet somebody who really loves you. So you go and you stand on your own, and you leave on your own, and you go home, and you cry and you want to die." I mean, I definitely didn't want to die, but I did wait till I got home to cry. So much had happened in that short space of time that I have to remind myself that it was only just a few months. I mean, it was literally just a summer, but it felt like a lifetime. And whenever I hear The Cure Lullaby or The Smiths' How Soon Is Now, I'm brought back to that space and time where, for a brief moment, I had that pounding heart, intense 80s love that I had been daydreaming about for as long as I can remember, as fleeting as it was. Bye.